Welcome to this episode of Men Who Understood the Times. I am Michael with Andy and Josh. Uh, so, Josh, what are you drinking tonight? Are you drinking a bottle of cough medicine?
No, I sound like Barry Manilow because I'm recovering from laryngitis, and so this looks like a beer. Will my camera pick up on this? Okay,
Yeah.
or like pond water if you go close. I picked this up when I was living in Beijing, and so this actually does help. The Chinese for this was flu bomb, which could be a weapon, I suppose, as well. And it's let me think here. So like a teaspoon of grated garlic, a teaspoon of grated ginger, honey, cayenne pepper, and then a drop of eucalyptus oil, um, boiled in a cup of water, and then half of a lemon squeezed on top. And so this smells like turpentine. Like
And,
it's
and,
straight up awful.
and that's why you're
However,
making a
it
face every
does
time you
help.
take a
Yes,
sip, right? Yeah.
it's not dramatic. It's or like imagine chugging Pine Sol. That's so there's no alcohol in this at all today because yeah.
Yeah. So just for our listeners, we are not using a voice modulator just to make
No,
Josh's voice sound
no,
sexier.
no.
And Andy, what are you drinking tonight?
Well, first, I want to point out that those sound very similar to all the toppings I put on my food at the Mongolian grill as well. Uh,
Yes.
Yeah, they're
and
great on
Josh,
beef.
I am disappointed since you're the only Wisconsin representative here on
Mhm.
this pod that you didn't just go down to the corner and buy like a handful of hot toddies.
Yeah, no, that's not never got into that.
Fair enough. On that note, though, because it is vacation, we're burning the midnight oil, staying up late and doing all the lazy, unhealthy things, and I don't want to end up with laryngitis. I've got a similar color profile drink,
Oh.
but Gatorade Zero tonight.
So I'm the only one drinking tonight, and I've got some salted caramel whiskey.
That sounds delightful.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to be talking about is diversity our national strength? And so our disclaimer is if you're brand new, is this might be a little political as opposed to all of our other ones that end up political too. I preached this Sunday on the Feast of the Holy Innocents, and there I talked about how Satan found a willing ally in King Herod in killing these baby boys, and that Satan finds willing allies today. And I named off a bunch, like Muslims and media and Hollywood and so forth. And there was a retired Lutheran pastor that had showed up in our church. He lives here in Casper. And he talked to me for a long time after the worship service, and he just said, "So, do you always talk politics like that?" And I said, "Oh yeah, my people, they don't care." And he said, "Well, have you ever lost anyone?" And I said, "No. The people here know what I'm going to be talking about." And I had made the comment in the sermon that I don't know how you feel about
Mhm.
President Trump, but, and then I went on and talked about how President Trump through our U.S. military in connection with the Nigerian military had dropped missiles on ISIS in order to tell them, hey, you got to let these Christian school children that you had kidnapped from the Catholic school go. And then and I told this retired pastor, said, I said that just to be nice. I know how our people here feel about President Trump. Uh, and then I also said that I said personally, I really like our president where he not only is protecting our Christians, but when he said in a Truth Social post, Merry Christmas, especially to you Islamic terrorists, the dead ones, and there's going to be many more of you unless you stop persecuting the Christians. And I said, that's sarcasm. And I like it because that's divine sarcasm. It reminds me of divine sarcasm of God in the Old Testament prophets. Uh, yeah, is it political? Yes. And I think we Christians, and we'll get to this in our last point tonight, we should be care about political things. So I had asked you guys before we started recording if you've ever listened to Schoolhouse Rock. So I'm a little older than you guys. You probably didn't grow up listening to Schoolhouse Rock on
Oh, I did. I just haven't seen the one you're talking about.
Saturday morning. Okay, you
Yeah.
saw it?
Yep.
Okay. So it's not one of the really good ones. not like conjunction junction and
Or like I'm just a bill in Capitol
yep,
Hill.
exactly.
That was solid.
Yeah. These are this is a weaker one, I think. But here are some of the lyrics. Uh, although Josh, you could probably sing it with your Barry Manilow voice. Um, Lovely Lady Liberty with her book of recipes, and the finest one she's got is the Great American Melting Pot. The Great American Melting Pot. America was founded by the English, but also by the Spanish, Dutch, and French. The principle still sticks. Our heritage is mixed, so any kid can be the president. And then one more paragraph. You simply melt right in. It doesn't matter what your skin, it doesn't matter where you're from or your religion. You jump right into the Great American Melting Pot. Oh, what a stew, red, white, and blue. So, Andy, first of all, what do you think? Not no, so much about the song and the lyrics, but what do you think about that analogy of a melting pot?
There are a lot of good things to think about there when we invite foreigners into our country. The original premise, the sort of what I might call the Ellis Island premise, was bring us your sick, bring us your poor, that kind of thing, where there are underprivileged people from other countries. And I don't mean privilege as in the modern critical theory term of oppression versus not oppressed, but rather those who, because of third world circumstances, seek the American dream. And so they ventured to America to try to find, through diligence, hard work, and law abiding, a better life for themselves. I'm not speaking of something Empyrean here, like some utopic America per se. I'm just talking about that understanding of immigration does fit with the founding motives and documents of our country. However, what it does not include are those hostile actors who abuse immigration systems and exploit them to undermine a country, which is, of course, what is going on rampantly today.
So with that, Josh, you can respond to this. So with an analogy of the stew, I had heard this too a little while ago. This was from a Muslim man named Abdullah. He was saying that, well, America is not a stew, it's a salad. So just a different food group. But his point was with the salad is that, like Andy said, because this was a Muslim man saying this, we said, we're not going to assimilate. We're all going to be different. And so we're going to remain different. So pick up on that idea of the salad and being different and not assimilating. Is that really what we're about here in America?
No, no, not at all. You have um, you have Western values, and what I think is interesting in reading Raymond Ibrahim's book Sword and Scimitar, the reason the West is called the West is because of Islam. Islam starts in the Middle East. Think about what that is, the Middle East, like just take it at face value, and then began spreading out from there and conquering, killing, and or subjugating everyone. And so you had the Far East, and then you had the West. And the whole reason that explorers like Vespucci and Columbus searching for a trade route um, to go around the backside of the world to get to the Far East was because if you went straight east, you'd be killed. And so those cultures don't mix. And I mean, you can already see the cultural conflicts here when you have a culture that has, and I mean Islam here. Islam has as its root, um, if you follow the Quran, you are supposed to subjugate all peoples under Sharia law and make every knee bend to Allah and say the Shabbat, where you are supposed to say there is no God but Allah, which denies Christ, and then Muhammad is his prophet. Um, and if you don't want to do that, you can pay the jizya, which part of the jizya, which we'll talk about, I think, probably in a minute here as well, Part of the rules for jizya is you're not allowed to proselytize. So that's not actually an option for Christians. And if you do, you're then marked for death. And so it's like, why would you invite that into your country? And just an observation I had this morning, I was reading the book of James, um, and then my wife is reading through Genesis again. And she she said that she was struck by the pattern, which had occurred to me as well, where you have God's people just absolutely losing everything that they had and following pagan gods. And God brings calamity because they're unthankful and they're grumbling. And then the calamity causes them to go back to God. And then it's like rinse, repeat, just on a cycle over and over and over again. And so you look at Europe, you had the Reformation in the 1500s and the Gospels just reigning in places like Germany. And Germany is profoundly blessed. And their response collectively is to become the secular German culture it is today, and then have in their liberal tolerance and liberal empathy to the point of being culturally suicidal, taking in millions of immigrants to the point where they're no longer German. Most of Europe has done this now. And now God says, okay, well, let's scoot over to the United States. We're going to profoundly bless these people over here. You can make the case that we are the most physically blessed group of people in human history. I think it's a strong case. You can argue it, but it's a strong case. And what have we done? We become a secular, godless nation who is profoundly unthankful. It's just part of our fabric. And so, no, having these subgroups that say we will not assimilate. And by the way, the core dictates of our religion say that we have to subjugate and or kill all the rest of you. That's not going to work.
Yeah, and that's our point, and we're going to get to that with the next question of assimilation, because what you're hearing now in Dearborn, Michigan, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and so forth is people's groups who do not want to assimilate. They're going to hold on to their religion, their culture, their language. And again, using that analogy of the salad, uh, I'm not a big salad eater. And but I like watermelon, with a fruit salad, and
It's not salad, dude.
I like egg
Not a
salad.
salad.
You
Also,
know,
also not salad.
what's that?
It's not a salad.
And um, I tried having a kale salad the other day. I couldn't finish it, but I like spinach and so forth. But the thing is, you don't want to put watermelon and cheese and egg and ham and carrots all all in the same salad. Okay, those do not merge. Those are separate, and that's what's happening in our culture is we're having all these disparate groups coming in, and they are not merging, they are not assimilating, and they're keeping separate. And so you have separate religions, separate language, separate culture. My youngest daughter, Bella's out here with us right now, and she was the one that said to me, "Hey, Dad, did you hear about this bus driver that got fired because she told her students on the bus to speak English?" And they thought that that was racist. And she tried telling the bus company and the school, "I can't break up the fight and I can't tell students what to do if they're not understanding English." But that's what's happening now. Uh, Josh, picking up on this, are all civilizations equal?
Um, no,
Okay.
no. Wish I could turn this voice on purpose. This would be good. Um, in some cultures, they greet their neighbors. In some cultures, they eat their neighbors. Do you have a preference? I just looked it up. Cannibalism is happening still in various parts of Brazil and Borneo. Um, those are cultural mores. Um, it is part of the culture of Chad, Niger, and Mauritania, concurrent with Islam again, to surgically remove the clitoris from little girls. That's part of their culture. That is an abhorrent, evil practice. And so I think as Christians, we need to be careful, in particular as American Christians, where um, we have this notion that cultural sovereignty is the first thing, and it is not. The Bible is the first thing. And um, I will, I will, I'll use the term Judeo-Christian. Apologies to Phil Hahn. Um, and I, the value structure that is inherent with Western civilization, um, in both Christianity and Judaism, um, trial by jury, for example, um, that we are a nation of laws, that there aren't honor killings, for example. Those ideas are hemmed in by borders, and that is a gift from God, and I think it's worth protecting. Um, for the sake of my children, for the sake of my eventual grandchildren, um, that I want them living in this civilization, in this culture. And do you want your grandkids growing up in a culture where if a member of the family does something wrong, they can all be killed? Because that is a part of certain cultures. So, no, not all cultures are equal. Some cultures have things that are innate to them that are in diametric opposition to Scripture. Scripture always wins. And as Christians, I see my brothers and sisters at times like saying, well, but that is their culture. And I'm like, it's okay. No, it's not. It's not okay. It's not biblical. And like the book is either true or it's not. And so I think that that's worth defending.
Yeah. So because I'm reading about Crusaders, I had never thought of this before, but it's been said that Christopher Columbus was the last Crusader, that one of his reasons for coming, well, he ended up in America was, he was on a Christian crusade. And so I was listening to one book on the results of Christopher Columbus here in America, and then that led me to another book I'm finishing up right now called Over the Edge of the World, which is about Magellan. And what you're talking about there, Josh, with different cultures. So Magellan, he was in the Philippines and killed, but while I was on my bike ride this morning and I was listening to the book and it talked about, and here I was going to do the young child warning for what my comment, but you beat me for your comment. Uh, so this one was
No, sorry.
that in the Philippines that there were the men had, and this was abhorrent to the white sailors, that they had a stud that pierced their penis. And the idea was that it would stay inside of the woman until he became soft, and so they could be having sex all day long. Okay. And again, that was abhorrent to the white men. This is not Christian. Uh, when I moved out here, out west, and I started reading books about out west, and out west, they're the American Indians. And, part of their culture was the raiding parties, that they would go and take women and children from other parties and then make them their wives and their slaves. They would take their horses and so forth. Uh, the Indians would have multiple wives. They'd have women that would be sleeping with the white men when, as beaver trappers and so forth, because it was believed in their culture that they could then receive that strength for themselves and for the whole tribe by sleeping with, say, a white man. And all of those things are documented. And my reason for bringing it up is those were not Christian practices. They all had heathen, pagan beliefs behind them. And those things did not change until Christianity was introduced. So, Andy, same question. Are all civilizations equal?
No, they're not. Just like not all baseball teams are equal, not all Broadway plays are equal. Some are better than others. From our perspective, what makes a nation superior, frankly, is spiritual always. And ethics derive from spiritual foundations. For example, the scriptures say, this is a well-known proverb, but righteousness exalts a nation, sin condemns any people. Nations that perpetuate sin find themselves in backward circumstances, sort of like in perpetuity. Now, there are rare exceptions, but this is one of the things I can't remember the name of the podcaster. His first name is David, author, Englishman. He's often interviewed, quite well known. I just can't think of his last name right now. But and I've mentioned this in prior podcasts, but he mentions that this is sort of the existential question that Muslims always have about themselves, especially as they build nations or overtake territories. It's like if Allah really approves of us and what we're doing and what he says is really true, how come once we get our hands on the reins, on the controls, we sort of torch every country we're ever in control of? We never develop, we never evolve. We're frankly poor or backwards or both. Again, the rare exception to that is maybe Qatar, maybe UAB, maybe um, you know Saudi Arabia with the oil. But even in those places, let's not pretend like there's all high-rise buildings everywhere. There's a lot of poverty and economic duress in those places as well.
It was
Oh,
Douglas Murray, by the way, who
Douglas
said
Murray,
that.
thank you.
Yeah.
Douglas Murray. I said David. Douglas Murray, thank you. Okay, so but here's I'm just thinking out loud here, something what you guys said, something that might be worth exploring in some detail if it hasn't been already, is just that every culture wherein Christianity takes on uh, predominance always develops sooner or later a counterculture, a counterculture that is disgruntled, malcontent with Christian mores, Christian, structures, whether the nation or the empire is prosperous or not. And what I think is unique about America, at least until now, is the way that we have accommodated the counterculture, those that don't want to be Christian or those that, frankly, don't want to believe something not necessarily subversive like Islam is, but that just want to be agnostic or atheistic, don't approve of it necessarily as a Christian, but because of our founding principles, we figured out a way that was far superior to those in history to accommodate that variance, right? Um, a couple other things here too, just riffing on this a little bit more. Because of what Josh said, and because of what we're talking about here with are some nations superior to others? Well, yes, they are. And I think we all recognize that at least America in its history has been far superior to other places. And what a gift of God we have enjoyed thanks to that. But that can mean only one thing, that those who want to subvert this country and its founding principles, its founding documents, its boundaries, its structures, its rule of law, they and I'm not just talking about, say, Islamic infiltrators. I'm talking about those who would, frankly, use Islam as an activist or agitational tool for the sake of power, money, control, some kind of utopia, like inviting the melting pot in as though we can create, some kind of heaven on earth in America by forcing people, compelling people to be part of a melting pot. But again, to say it again, those who are coordinating and orchestrating this kind of uh, demise of our own country as it has been as it has existed, they are doing it for evil purposes only. And if you don't think something like the Somalian fraud case going on now, not just in Minnesota, but Texas, California, Colorado in parts, and elsewhere too. They're uncovering it elsewhere too. If you don't think this is part of a greater whole, then you're not just naive, you are purposely turning a blind eye because this is deliberate. Absolutely.
And that's what we're going to get to right next. And what you were saying there, Andy, reminded me of this. If you study the Constitution and our American laws that everything was built on for our nation, you have to believe that those things they came from God. And not that the Holy Spirit inspired them like he did the Bible, but just the same way I feel about my book. When I read over passages of my book, I go, man, this is really good stuff. This had to come from God because this is not the way I would normally talk or write. And I think that's the way it is with Jefferson and Madison and Washington and so forth. And because I've been reading Raymond Abraham's books on the the Crusades and so forth, and studying Islam. And the more I've studied Islam, I would say, okay, yeah, this was inspired too, but by Satan or one of his major demons, because it is that good. Because it fits into how do you take over a culture? How do you subjugate a culture? How do you, as a religion, say, be, why were these Muslim crusaders uh, so adamant and such warriors? Well, they won no matter what. If they lived, they conquered people and they got to keep everything and keep the women and men and children as slaves, as sex slaves. And if they died, well, then they went uh, to their version of heaven, and they got women as sex slaves too. Either way, they won. That's inspired, and it has to be inspired by demons. Let's get into that fraud. So Nick Shirley has been exposing fraud in Minneapolis. Here's this young guy, rogue reporter on his own, although thankfully now it looks like he's walking around with some kind of security. Because again, my youngest daughter, Belle, as we were driving to and from Cheyenne today, she had found that, well, uh, well, it has been claimed that Somalians have put a hit out on him. And I don't disagree that that's probably true. So this is what he's found. Uh, so he found $100 million in fraud in one day. 14 Somali, quote, healthcare companies in one building, one daycare center it was called the Leering Center. They had even misspelled Learning Center. Somali daycare for 74 kids, but there's no children present in a building with no windows, no playground equipment. They were paid $126 million in 2024. A Somali restaurant in Minneapolis claimed to be feeding 6,000 kids every day. Investigators they fed only 40 kids in 6 weeks while pocketing 40 million in federal money, meaning our tax dollars. So, Josh, first of all, I don't think there's any question that there's fraud, but there's three questions I'm going to ask you. Is Do you think that maybe Democrats are complicit in this? Where are the Republicans not just calling it out, but actually doing something about this? And then uh, where is the legacy media in all this? So there's a bunch of questions there for you dealing with this fraud.
It's all the same question. I mean,
It's,
really, it's sort of all the same
yeah, it
question.
is.
So when you have fraud on this scale, and what really strikes me is young Mr. Shirley didn't really even do anything that required remarkable depth of skill. I mean, he and his buddies like just did a FOIA request on how much money these places had received, and then drove to those addresses. It's like, all right, so there's 140 kids here. Um, so first they went for several days, didn't see any kids, didn't see any footprints in the snow. And then watching those checks continue to roll in, then they went and knocked on the doors. and over and over and over again. And for me, it's the scale. Like, um, I think about the institution that I work for, and I know what its operating budget is. As a reminder, we do not represent our schools or our places of ministry. We are an independent podcast. Um, and I shouldn't say that number on air here, but it's it's not $9 billion, billion with a B, and that's just Minnesota, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg here. Um, it's and all those people who paid their taxes, that's where this comes from. That wealth was stolen from the United States taxpayer. And because some of those dollars were federal dollars, these are your dollars as well. And so give to God what is God, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. My goodness, that becomes more difficult when you know what's happening to it. And part of what's happening to it, to answer your second question, is um, so there are, well, how do Somalis vote? I'd love to know how Somalis are voting. I mean, because they're not, most of them aren't citizens. They're here. Some of them are here legally, but how is Ilhan Omar represented? She and what was the who was the almost the mayor of Minneapolis? What was that guy's name?
I'm not sure.
That guy.
Yeah.
Um, Andy, maybe look it up. I don't know. Uh, he lost because of the tribal politics of Somalia, where he came from. And so you have these people who were like 100,000 Somalians were dumped in Minnesota, and they very nearly elected this Somalian guy who has said that we're going to represent Somalia. So how much of that money is not then being just donated back to Democrat political candidates? Um, I
Omar
don't.
Fatah
There we
is his
go.
name.
Omar Fayed. Yeah, that guy. Um, and and so he wasn't a member of the particular tribe who had more people there, and so he lost because of Somali tribal politics, which is just wild. Um, and so the whole thing is a mess. And where's the legacy media? The legacy media is just a branch of the Democrat Party, and so I that's they are where they usually are, which is silent. And I do think though this is actually too big. I mean, just the scope and scale of this is not going to go away for them. They have to deal with this. Um, the other thing that I want to mention, just tangentially to this, okay. Um, I was discussing left and right wing, or left wing versus right wing political violence a while ago with a friend of mine who is of the lefty persuasion, and he mentioned the murder of, I think it's Melissa Hartman in Minnesota.
Mhm.
Um, Melissa Hartman was the only Democrat who voted against funding for um, non-citizen immigrants for healthcare. She was the only one who voted against it, and she cast the deciding vote. And she was murdered 6 days later by a Tim Walz supporter or appointee. I'm sorry, Tim Walz appointee. And so
A
there's
Waltz
no,
appointee who, by the way, under interview and on record said that he was directed by Tim Waltz to do that.
no.
Yep.
So not an allegation, but there are the dots, and grab a pen.
Well, and that's the same question then, or questions to you, Andy. Are the Democrats complicit in this because they're moving people from Somalia to Minnesota, and they're obviously voting Democrat. Tim Walz is the Democrat governor, but then I think many of us would vote Republican. Where are the Republicans in calling this out and actually doing something? I see them going on news programs. I never see them not just calling them out, but doing something, putting people in jail. So, what about our elected representatives?
Well, I have a lot to say,
Yeah.
so forgive me for the the rant here, if you will. But first of all, just to touch on one thing from before, how every culture develops a counterculture. I just want to give an example of that. Like Josh had mentioned Germany, and you had this great Reformation. Well, Hegel and Marx were born out of that later on as well, later generations, because they were sort of part of the counterculture, right? Against that Lutheran theology that developed. The Age of Reason came out of that, right, as a counterculture reaction to the age of Christianity. So
Yeah,
that's
the pietism and rationalism that we're still dealing with pietism
yeah,
in
yeah.
Lutheranism today. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so now back to the subject at hand, a couple things. So what I was touching on before, which dovetails on this nicely, is that if if you know the nation is structured and principled a certain way, and you are willfully inviting in, as just one example, Islamists, okay, this in this particular case of the Somalian or bent or Somalian origin, you're either doing it because you're willfully trying to subvert the nation in which you are, or you're doing it because of politics, like you're deal making, right? Which so then you got power, money, other motives involved. Okay, I think what people sometimes think is that when I or Josh, when we touch on critical theory and Marxism, and we mention there are two purposes that are constant in the attempt to perpetuate the revolution. Number one is to wake everyone up to their oppression, their alienation. Okay, that's where the term woke comes from. And then the second is activism, and the activism has to be perpetual. That keeps the revolution going. There is no end to the revolution. Most Marxists, when they're pinned down, will say you never actually achieve the communist utopia. But what I don't want people to misunderstand is that activism only occurs in like the uber liberal, orange dyed hair, butch haircut teacher in the second grade of your local public school, or that the activism only occurs with staged and well funded by George Soros and the World Economic Forum and other guys who own Starbucks or whatever, who fund these protests on the street or at the universities. These are the most obvious and public examples of activism. But the activism is not just perpetual, but it is everywhere. And so, yes, the Democrats are complicit because the Democratic Party is, by their own admission, social democratic now. They are Marxists. And so, what they do is they overwhelm the system. They don't, activism is not just a protest. They are trying to make it so impossible to put out every fire over here, every fire over there, every fire over here. The Republicans, even if they do have integrity, which I'm not saying they do, many of them, most of them probably don't, um, they can't even keep up. I mean, how many court cases can you instigate? How many prosecutions can you actually see through, especially in a term of one Congress or one president? The point is, you cannot. And so the Marxists are overwhelmingly successful right now. I guarantee you, and I'm not just saying this like, as part of a rant. It's documented on Twitter, on various websites. If you do a little bit of research and reading, this is not isolated in Minnesota. This is not isolated by a few immigrants. This is not isolated by a few politicians. And this is not isolated in a 1 or 2 year span. This has been going on for a long time. And it's only part of a much broader whole of revolution, which is this overwhelming, this swarming the system is part of the form of activism that is in place right now.
So something you said there, Andy, reminded me of our very first episode that we titled "Thank God for Charlie Kirk," and I asked the question of you, Andy, is what's the reason why all this violence is allowed? And then you said, well, I'm sure your question's sarcastic, Mike. Well, it wasn't sarcastic, but you answered it here too, is it's all about overwhelming the system. And that leads to the next question, is this Somali fraud that we see in Minneapolis and elsewhere, is it just part of their culture or is it part of their religion? And before I let you talk, Josh, uh, I'm gonna give an answer here too. Is I personally believe as part of their religion because this is jizya, which is a poll tax on non-Muslims as a mark of their inferiority and their submission. Quran 9:29 says, "Fight those who do not believe in Allah until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued." And so here we are uh, having our own American people paying money to Muslims through this fraud as part of our subjugation to them. I had one of our fans send me a picture this week of I don't know if it was a mayor, but I know it was a Democrat representative in Minneapolis, and she's wearing the headscarf and so forth. And then on either side, she's got a Somalian man on her right and a Somalian woman on her left. And it looks like it's a hostage as she's giving her interview. Uh, and then I think it's also part of their religion because this is Taqiyya of or Taqiyya, where it is where Muslims are said it's okay for them to lie in order to for the greater good. So that's my take on this. So go ahead and build on that, Josh. Is this part of their culture or is this part of the religion?
That's a yes, both. If you look at um, the other thing Somali is famous for, given the locale of their country, kind of on the eastern horn of Africa on the other side there. They have a thin country that has a ton of coastline, and so like Somali piracy has been a huge problem for a long, long time. And so they are a kleptocracy. A part of their culture is theft for and to the benefit of the tribe. And so you have a highly tribal culture that has no problem with theft. And if you are a victim of the theft, it's your fault for being able to be victimized. And that's supported by jizya. And excuse me. One of the things that's important to note with the jizya tax is if you um, if you refuse to bend the knee to Allah and deny Jesus in doing so, which that's not an option for any Christian, um, you can say, well, okay, well then you can pay the jizya or we'll kill you. Like those are the three options. Or they'll say we have to fight, which means they will attempt to kill you. Um, it's really important that Christians understand this is not a benevolent live and let live situation. And so the jizya tax also has heavy stipulations where you are a second or third class citizen living under a system like that, yeah, which is part of Sharia law, wherein you are not allowed to proselytize, you are not allowed to spread the gospel. If you do, default to option C. And so if we are following the Great Commission, we violate jizya. If we and we well, if we follow our faith, the end result of that is martyrdom. And while I think any Christian worth their salt should be willing to face martyrdom, I don't think it's wise to run towards it on purpose, forsaking a culture that does not have martyrdom as part of its de facto setup. Um, and so I kind of wandered away from your question there. I'm sorry, but you mostly answered your own question as well. So there's that.
Well, yeah, I wanted to try and get to it before you did. But before you get to it, Andy, something too from Rabin Ibrahim in one of his last books I had read on Crucified Again. There he talked about how why we're seeing this rise of Islam. That for a long time, I'm a little older than you guys. I didn't hear anything about Muslims here in America or around the world. And that's because, as Ibrahim points out, is there was strength here in America. There was military strength, political strength, cultural strength, and so forth. But as our people and politicians became watered down, we started hating ourselves, we started changing our history and so forth. We became weaker from the inside out. Well, the Muslims around the world, they saw that. And then yeah, they emigrated here. They're trying to overtake us because they see us as weak because we have weakened ourselves. Uh, and yeah, that live and let live system. Yeah, that is not what their religion is, and that's not the Crusades. I have like 13 books from our Casper library on the Crusades, and I read Ibrahim's books first, so I know the truth. I trust him as a Christian. He has that Christian worldview. So any books that I start reading that start saying, well, the Crusaders were the aggressors and the Muslims were the ones being attacked, I just return those to the library because they've been infected with that weak worldview, like so many of us in America. We need to wake up in a Christian way and then see how we're being attacked. So go ahead, Andy, and answer that same question. Is this Somali fraud part of their culture or is it part of their religion?
Yes, it's possible that there are some unwitting victims or players along the way, like, say, a Somalian mother who's nominally Muslim and whose husband beats her, and is she willfully funding all these things? I, of course, we can't judge every individual, but can we say that they have been both perpetrators who have come here to subvert, but also um, pawns that have been deployed on behalf of Marxists to help subvert? On all sides, yes. I'm going to take that though and say just expand upon that idea of overwhelming the system. I just want you guys to listen to this so that we can give some tangible, some concrete examples. Okay, if you were, let's just for the sake of this discussion, although we know there are exceptions on the Republican side, but if you were Donald Trump or a president who saw things that are going on as they are evil, and you had assassinations of your political enemies, lawfare to the extent that they've got it now, uh, corrupt and non-US supportive or non-US assimilated or non-US allied appointees in any office, whether it be legal or educational or administrative or in the CIAs and NSAs of the world, right? You have protests, coordinated protests. You have curriculum overhauls and rewriting of history. You have unjust wars. You have immigration that is absolutely coordinated and orchestrated in a wrong way. You have the deceptive use and manipulation of language. You have inflation. You have election fraud and rigging. I mean, where would you even begin? And you have to not only address all these things, but you have to find enough allies in a sordid political pool to help you address them. This is why I'm not optimistic that uh, America, as we used to know it, is going to win this war. I think the Marxists have taken far too much ground. But I'm not saying that in a, you know, foreboding or dour or fearful way either, because I'm a Christian. But I want fellow Christians who listen to this to know the primary reason we lament these things as brothers is because we are marking our times. God calls us the psalmist pleads with God, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. This is part and parcel to what it means to mark our times and to mark our days, both so that we know what's going on in the world and we don't just bury our heads in the sand, but so that if we are called to do so, we may defend our brothers and sisters in more than a number of ways. I mean, physically, we hope it never comes to that. But we can also advocate on behalf of our brothers or sisters by not perpetuating these evils, by not voting for people who we know are willfully subverting us, or who are willfully targeting Christians or willfully targeting other human beings in violent ways. willfully defrauding us, willfully implementing false religions and false gods, right? You can love your neighbor by simply staying in tune with what's going on, praying against it, then working against it to the peaceful degree that you can, beginning with voting properly.
Yeah, and that's going to lead me to the last question. But a couple of things you said reminded me of this is I mentioned this in church and Bible study. I said, yeah, Trump's President Trump's rhetoric will turn people off. Uh, but there's two things you have to understand about President Trump is he's from Hollywood. He's going to talk like a Hollywood person. He's a media personality. And secondly, he is not saying anything that our former politicians, if you read the history back in the first and second centuries of America, they were way more bombastic than President Trump is. Okay. His is just amplified because of social media.
Well, and he's not a lawyer like they all were. So lawyers are boring, and he's got more personality.
Yeah. Yeah. He's actually fun to listen to. But the rest of our politicians on both sides of the aisle, they're just always placating. They're not actually doing anything. Yes, he takes a lot of heat, like you said, Andy, because he's actually doing something, and it's a lot to try and do. It's overwhelming. Uh, and then uh, uh, oh, I think Josh, you shared this with me that that Muslims are saying, "Hey, it's not enough for us to take over mayors and so forth of different states. We need to take over governorship, and we can do that in Wyoming, for example, because there's so few people. We have less than
Mm.
6,000 residents in our whole state." And I said, I don't think that's going to happen. First of all, and this is not a racist thing. That's one of the sad things about the culture we live in. If you say anything about any kind of race or skin color or so forth, all of a sudden you're misogynistic, you're racist. Is This is not racist. It's just there are white people in Wyoming for whatever reason. We have several Indians, we have some of our Mexicans, not many other any darker skin color people, and we welcome everyone, obviously, but people will stand out, and everyone has guns out here to protect ourselves. Uh, I had a poll. I saw a poll a little while ago that Wyoming is only second behind Montana as far as number of guns per citizen. And my youngest daughter, Bella, again, she shared this with me because out of my four daughters, she is very politically astute, and she had shared a video that a U.S. military person that had uh, is now retired had said that he was talking to former Soviet Union people of why they never attacked America, and he said they figured the Soviet Union could take our U.S. military, but all of their scenarios they could never figure out how do they take America because too many of our citizens own our own guns. And that was the point of the video was to say, the Second Amendment is for a lot of reasons, and that's one of them, that we can't have foreign invasion. Uh, and I bring that all up because if we have this if we have this Men Who Understood the Times conference, I'm going to be talking about are we needing a second or another Christian crusade? We need to be willing to protect ourselves. So last question, and Andy was building on this, Josh, is why should we care? Why do we have an episode here at the end of this year where we have a high school teacher and two pastors talking about all of this fraud and talking about assimilation into America? Why should we care as American Christian citizens?
Um, First of all, is my mic on right now?
Yes.
Oh crud! I'm really sorry, you guys. There's a little red button on here that I thought was muting it as I was coughing earlier, so that
No,
didn't
we
work
heard it all.
apparently. I'm very sorry. I'll use the little mic down here, I guess. Um, I think it's part of good stewardship. Um, there's what is the Bible verse? I looked it up earlier. Pray for the land that you're in. the Jeremiah. Um, the Bible directs us to pray for and um, be thankful for what we've been given. It's important to talk about this because there's this air of, okay, first of all, understand what the times are, and then understand what you can do about them. And um, individually, there's nothing any one of us can individually do about this. And yet you've got guys like Nick Shirley. Nick Shirley is also in the category of just this one random inconsequential YouTuber right up until I mean, I think he's over 100 million views on his last video. Um, that's not inconsequential. And to the extent that those inconsequential people can all of a sudden become massively consequential, it would be good for all of us in the context of taking care of the gifts that God has given us if those people who are inconsequential and become consequential are Christians and are pursuing and supporting a worldview and an ethos that is in line with Scripture and in line with God's word.
You're right. When you have the Vice President of the United States commending Nick Shirley on this and then asking where is the legacy media on it, yeah, he has become consequential. And so, yeah, it is important for us as Christians when we see this fraud to call it out. It is not racist. It is not misogynistic to be able to notice there are differences in culture, like we talked about in the beginning of this episode. And then to say there needs to be prison time, there needs to be deportations happening because this is fraud. This is stealing our tax dollars. That when you have regular citizens like us paying 20, 30, 40% of our income to the government, and then we see them wasting it. That is being stolen, and then uh, there is evidence that it's not just being stolen and kept here, but it's being sent back to Somalia and going to ISIS and so forth, and funding terrorism there, and then that terrorism coming back here. Yes, uh, just on a smaller scale, if I knew that someone was breaking into my house and that I didn't do anything about it, instead, what I did is I gave money to someone so in order to fund them to buy weapons to come into my house. That's what's happening. Yes, we should care about that. So, Andy, same question. Why should we as Christian citizens care about something like this?
Just imagine the German army infiltrating Allied force bases or forts, say, and setting up shop and radioing back saying, "Hey, we got our new headquarters in the land of the enemy." And the Allied forces just say, "Now let them be." They're just of a different race, culture, nationality. When they are willfully telling you, the Germans in this analogy, that they want to overtake you. We have let the enemy in the door, and they're telling us they have no interest not just in assimilating, but in allowing us to live the way we live now in the freedom of America, much less the freedom of our Christian faith. Okay, I digress. Why should we care? For a few reasons. Number one, Proverbs 21:21. I always like the passages in the Bible that have easy to remember chapters and verses. But Proverbs 21:21 says, "Whoever pursues righteousness and love finds life, prosperity, and honor." I could say this is why Muslim nations never find prosperity and honor, much less long lives, right? But what I'm trying to say is the 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 man of integrity, the Christian with integrity, wants to pursue honesty, clarity, the welfare of their neighbor. You cannot ignore what's going on in our world, as Josh said with regard to stewardship. You cannot turn a blind eye to it or sweep it under the rug and pretend like you're loving your neighbor. That is passive disobedience to God, if not active, obedience to your country. Um, the second thing is that, you know, on the one hand, Josh makes a good point. Individually, there's probably not a whole lot we can do. I don't think we should look at prayer as impractical. I mean, you think about the Israelites who groaned to God in Egypt. Now, it took a long time, but God finally did send their rescuer. You think about all the, frankly, inconsistent generations during the eras of the judges. They cried out to God, and God sent a deliverer. Let's get on our spiritual phones much more regularly and pray for things that are not just personal or wants and needs in our own limited, narrow-minded worldviews. But let's pray about our neighbor. Let's pray about our country. Let's pray that God curbs the evils that are encroaching right now. And then last but not least, why should a believer care? Well, on a much more optimistic note here, while we may never stem this tide, or maybe we will. I mean, it's up to the Lord, but we certainly need to pray and ask his favor. But let's say that the worst does happen, that we never um, regain any ground. Isn't this yet more proof that all the words that God has spoken to us in Matthew 24 and Mark 15 and elsewhere are true? God's end times predictions are spot on. And again, I'm not trying to even be sensational here. I'm just trying to say there will be terrible times in the last days. The love of most will grow cold. Jesus says, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? There will be persecutions, wars, rumors of wars. I mean, you pay attention to the times, not so that you turtle up in fear, but rather than so that you can also say to God, like pray a knowing prayer, an informed prayer, specific, but so that you can thank the Lord that even in ominous times, you see his word for the truth that it absolutely is.
We were talking about prayer, so I mentioned this in my sermon this Sunday on Holy Innocents, and it fit perfectly. I said, we're going to start today on this feast where we remember the massacre of these uh, a dozen or 2 dozen baby boys. We're going to start praying for our Christians around the world who are being persecuted for their Christian faith because of because of their Muslim governments and groups and families. And so we're going to pray from Afghanistan all the way to Yemen. So I've been writing uh, prayers based on the website Voice of the Martyrs because they have uh, for every of these one of these nations from Afghanistan to Yemen, like I said, a little synopsis of what's going on there. And so I put together prayers and I encourage people to do the same thing, whether it's individually and then also talk to their pastors because I asked a couple of pastors, hey, do we have any prayers like this? And they said, well, we have a general prayer for persecution. I said, that's not what I want. I want specific prayers for this. Uh, and then uh, we were talking earlier about diversity. Is diversity our strength? I don't think so. That's what you're going to hear a lot about. But all you have with diversity is you just have different ways of doing things, and that breaks it down. The Bible doesn't talk about diversity as a strength. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 10, about unity being our strength. He says, brothers, I am making an appeal to you using the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. I ask that you all express the same view and not have any divisions among you, but that you be joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. So unity is our strength. Uh, also, we didn't get a chance because we had Christmas and so forth to talk about more on our conference. But I did have one of our fans, gentleman, right away say, "Hey, she's interested and she's coming to wants to come to uh, our conference." And I said, "Well, you win the prize. You don't really win anything for it, but you win the prize for being the first person uh, that's interested in coming. You can just say that you're a little more pious than everyone else." And one of our members this week said, "Hey, a conference would be really good. Maybe it can be like one of the comic conferences where people dress up like their favorite superheroes." And so he said, "Well, it'd be easy to dress up like Josh. We just have to get a nice hat like him and an ugly Raider sweatshirt like Andy, and then they can dress up like us." And then lastly, want to end with this,
Shots
but
fired.
And then I will end with this Bible verse about, again, why should we care about this as Christian citizens? Well, God cares about fraud. Solomon wrote in Proverbs 20, verse 17, food gained by fraud tastes sweet, but one ends up with a mouthful of gravel. Lord's blessings on your Christmas celebrations, which are now ended, although you're still in the Christmas season until you get to January 6th for the Epiphany Festival, and then Lord's blessings on the end of this year, and Lord willing, we'll see you all in the next year.